It's all stadium music, and it's powerful, it's exciting, it's dynamic. It's got all the qualities that kind of get inside you and like lift you and take you out. It's entertainment at its most powerful.
I don't think that we've seen the likes of Freddie Mercury since. I can't quite see how we're going to see anyone like him again. The world's changed. He's a legend.
I thought, what's a real funky rock and roll audience going to say to this prancing ballerina coming on? I thought, fine, I'll sing my rock and roll songs with a tutu on, I don't care.
And whenever there's any sort of poll of greatest tunes ever, Bohemian Rhapsody always comes out top. So there's this incredible timelessness about them.
Queen emerged from the British progressive rock scene of the early 1970s. A band that the conservative rock industry initially felt it had no place for, Queen quickly found cult status following its inception in 1971, and went on to become one of the most successful British bands of its era. This was largely due to the energy and charisma of the band's flamboyant singer, Freddie Mercury, whose larger-than-life personality seemed to dominate the band during their 20 years until his death in 1991. But credit for their phenomenal success must also be given to the three surviving members, whose unique talents created some of the most exceptional rock music of the late 20th century.
It was make or break really with the first two albums, and I think that comes through really well in the music. It stands up to repeated listens because they've got everything to play for. So first single, Keep Yourself Alive, for instance, which didn't actually chart, it's the only one of their singles which didn't. It's got a lot of life in it, as if the band really were sort of desperate to reach that level of fame, which was inevitably going to come their way, but there was still a chance that it might not happen. But also on that album you've got more tender moments.
The first time you can really get to grips with Brian May, there's some stuff on the first album which is, they had to record it very quickly at night, evidently. But it's the second album, it's Queen 2. Brian's often been quoted as saying this is his favourite album. And to me, the reason is because it's so heavy, It's full on prog rock, glam rock, or whatever you want to call it. 74, I think it came out. It was absolutely amazing. So Brian wrote all the songs on one side, I think Roger wrote one song on one side, and Freddie wrote all the songs on another side. It was called Side White, Side Black. It was all rock and roll guitar, really heavy stuff.
I remember the first Queen experience I think one had was seeing this probably 7-inch vinyl EMI tune arriving at Radio 1, and the name was very much kind of a stamp of authority somehow. Queen could have meant all kinds of things. It could be very airy-fairy, but it had just the logo alone seemed to say, we're here and you can hear a lot about us, which was very much part of their image. Whether they thought it all out or not, it looked like they had. They were very authoritative, which was kind of unusual at that time, which was sort of early 70s. People, were still getting over the shock, I think, that the 60s, the big party was all over, and that this was a whole new decade with all different music. And so for a band to come along to have that kind of very positive image from day one was very impressive.
But the next album, which was Sheer Heart Attack, of course had Killer Queen on, which is one of the classics, certainly one of Queen's classic songs, and arguably one of the classic songs of all time. Got to number 2 in the charts, I think, had a fantastic solo in there. And that's the first time I remember being struck by the harmonies, being struck by the arrangements. Massive vocal harmonies, a melody you could hang your hat on.
Top of the Pops was the thing, the Killer Queen thing, and I saw that was the first time, and it was a very odd piece of footage, but I liked it, and it was. I mean, when they did those things, it was quite riveting, because I mean, you either you liked it or you didn't. They're sort of quite instant. I think later on in later music, it grows on you on other things, but it was quite a bizarre with this little half mic and the fingernails and things.
I would say that on the back of Killer Queen, if you hear Brian play, he was starting to make his reputation as one of the best UK rock guitar players. He's technically fine. There are many better guitar players than him. And again, he'd be the first to admit it. But he's unique. And if that's a mark of whether you're a good player or not, then he's absolutely one of the best who's ever lived. There's no doubt about it at all. You hear him play, you know that it's him.
Brian is an individual that you listen to music and you think, hang on, that's Brian. He's got, you know, the Brian sound. I mean, and you know, he's recognised as one of the best guitarists in the world. You know, as Freddie was vocalist when he was alive, people knew his voice. It's an instantly recognisable sound.
But he was a phenomenal singer. I mean, that voice. I mean, it was so strong, and you know, the great singers always pitch just under the note, you know, just over the note. Because the projection is above. That's what carries it all above, you know, or below. And that's what he could do, you know. That's why it was so strong, because it cut through everything.
It crossed the bridge between operatic and pop. His technique was incredible. I mean, he could reach the highest notes. And he used to come home and we'd put on videos, you know, in his house, and he would show me things like who could reach the top notes in all these opera performances. He had endless tapes of opera, and he'd start singing along with it and reach those notes himself. So I think he could have been, well, I think his composing and his singing comes from a classical world and integrated with pop music, so it had that wonderful crossover.
John Deacon is an amazing bassist, and he is underrated, I think, musically and also as a songwriter. You know, things like You're My Best Friend, brilliant songs, and if it weren't for the fact that they were overshadowed by some of the larger singles of Queen's career, I think he would have been the absolute champion songwriter in Queen. And technically as well, I think he's an amazing bassist in that he can play a bass line and make it sound fluid or smooth or just completely natural.
And Roger, of course, you know, is just again like Freddie, a showman. You know. He loved, you know, that whole expressive, dramatic performance that they provided, you know. And he's a great drummer, you know, and he just, you know, the vocals, of course, were, you know, a great, you know, with the three of them, with Brian, Roger, and Fred. It just, you know, they're just so professional, and that's what really made them.
By the end of 1974, the band had been voted Best Live Act by readers of Britain's tabloid Sun newspaper. By September, their contracts with Trident had become restrictive, and having signed a new contract with John Reid, went on to work on one of their most ambitious singles to date, a 7-minute Freddie Mercury composition called Bohemian Rhapsody.
The song that really blew me away, which I'm sure it did to everybody, was Bohemian Rhapsody. And it was almost operatic. And coming from the classical world of ballet and opera, which I only knew then, I thought this is integrating the two together. And it was fascinating, the great voices they had as well, especially Freddie's, of course. He could have almost sung an opera if he wanted to.
We went to see Freddie in the studio. The Roundhouse studio. And he was thrilled, you know. I bothered to turn up. And the guys were really sweet. And Freddie said, I want you to play. It's not finished yet, but I want you to hear it. And we were the first two people to hear bow rap outside the band. You know, because it was so long, they were worried, of course, that nobody was going to play it because of, you know, airtime. And I just thought, no, you know, I told them not to do anything, to just absolutely keep it as it, however long it was, just keep it. People will play what they want, don't do a shortened version. I think EMI were trying to convince them to do that.
Bohemian Rhapsody happened to be, it was basically like 3 songs that I wanted to put out, and I just put the 3 together.
Right.
And then it had a very big risk factor, yes. The radios didn't really like it initially because it was too long, and the record company said, you know, you can't market it that way. And after me having virtually put the 3 songs together, they wanted me to sort of slice it up again.
I just said, look, it's either going to be, you know, a minor hit, or it's going to be just enormous. I mean, because it's so incredibly different. And I think maybe you might have something really good on your hands.
It was the most bizarre piece of music. It was like, obviously, the operatic feeling was coming through by then. What on earth? I still don't know what it's about. I still don't know what this collection of words is. Almost like, you know, cutting up phrases and sticking them in. But I mean, by then, and you can hear a lot of echoes of Bohemian Rhapsody, a lot of earlier Queen tracks. You can feel them now with the benefit of hindsight. You can feel them. That's what they were edging towards. And the main difference between Queen and any other rock band is the operatic feel, and the fact that they use their voices as a choir, as an instrument.
But the reason Bohemian Rhapsody is such an amazing song, you can listen to it now and it's still valid in 2004. It's got all these different styles. The vocal midsection notwithstanding, which hasn't been done since, to that standard and that musical standard. It's the beginning bit before the piano, is all Freddie Mercury. Roger and Brian aren't singing on that. It's all Freddie. That's why it's just gives you goosebumps before the melody even comes in. So the first time you hear it, you have no idea what's going on. The first time I ever heard it, probably like most people, was the video on Top of the Pops.
The impact that had, and they were using techniques which were new to television with the revolving images, and in fact for a while every director of Top of the Pops could not resist having these revolving images because it was like obviously the new toy to play with. But if you think Queen, you think Bohemian Rhapsody, you immediately think of those revolving images. You can't help it.
And he said, I've got this idea for a song, and he sort of sat down and sort of started playing the song, and it was all going along good, and he sort of, you know, he had some words missing and some bits of melodies still hadn't quite worked out, but it was just a basic framework of the song. Then he said he was playing away and he stopped and said, now dears, this is where the opera section comes in. I went, oh my God.
It's what every songwriter should aspire to. Whatever anybody thinks of Queen, if you could write a song that can stand in the same room as Bohemian Rhapsody, you're on the right track. The vocal harmonies in the middle, the cadence, da-da-da-do-do-do-do, don't worry about the lyrics, they don't mean a thing. Do-do-do-do-do, that had never been done before. That's 10 overdubs at least a time. Roy Thomas Baker has to have some hand in it for the production side of it, but the whole thing was Freddie Mercury. The whole thing had it in his head, in its entirety, before he even took it to the band, apparently. That's when the, you know, darling, this is when the Galileos come in. That's that classic phrase from that time. But it's got the best, it sums up why Queen are so good. The vocal harmonies, the amazing melody, the arrangements, the guitar, of course, the head-banging bit in the back of the car and Wayne's World. You know, that's amongst the heaviest stuff that Queen had ever done. The iconic solo, the little bit at the end, just playing da-da-da-da, nothing really matters to me. Fantastic. It is the best song that's ever been written. It just is.
Bohemian Rhapsody climbed rapidly to #1. And by Boxing Day, Queen had their first British #1 album. Meanwhile, the Queen touring machine rolled relentlessly on.
What one has to realise is that in the early days, Freddie was not the front man, it was Brian. You know, Freddie was on the piano, kind of like occasionally getting up and, you know, that's it. And it really wasn't until when they were touring with A Night of the Opera that Fred came forward as the front man. And this is what began to happen in their first American tour. And I just thought, you know, when you've got this amazing track, I mean, this amazing song, which was, you know, doing really well in the States at the time, you know, it's just a wonderful thing to see, you know, performed live. I mean, how were they going to do it? That was what the amazing thing. Yes, it was #1 here, but how do you do that live? And they did it so well. I mean, you know, it's so clever.
I was at home in Plymouth, and I just turned on the TV. I think it was New Year's Eve, and it was a concert they were doing from Hammersmith. And I saw this guy, Freddie Mercury, in this white clownish makeup and this long black hair, and thought, that's outrageous. I'd never seen a band behave quite so off the wall in theatrical terms, which of course I was with the Royal Ballet at the time, and he was in tights as well, I think. And I thought, God, this is a departure from the normal pop group. So that's what interested me, first of all, as well as the music. And it's just left a lasting impression on me all my life. I think he was wearing all white or something. And of course the music as well. And even the technicalities of the stage presentation, I think that's what also made them really quite famous, was that they were doing bizarre things with their shows. Mostly at this period, people were just going on with the rest of the band, you know, and jamming away, which was great, but he made it a whole, like a ballet, theatrical experience.
I like to be entertained, and that's what I liked about the entertainment and the taking over, like, you know, when Freddie goes away and Brian would almost come centre and stuff like that. I like that sort of ebb and flow, which is what I found them. Concerts that I found that I can remember. I remember Madison Square Garden once when Bicycle. Remember that was a big hit, and that was fantastic because that was coupled with Fat Bottom Girls. And I think I was on stage as well with some of them because we were singing some of the choruses in the back, just like a group with roadies and everything. But I remember the girls coming down on the Fat Bottom Girls coming down on the bicycles, and that was great. Just those little moments of sheer show magic.
Queen's longevity has often been attributed to their sheer determination to succeed, as well as their respect for each other and their passion for producing music.
You have to think that they were friends, first and foremost. Then you also have to remember that it's a business. So try and think of how any company with 4 CEOs, you know, it cannot be just one whole. There's pulling here, pushing there, because each of them had an equal say. That was one thing Freddie strongly emphasized. He hated it whenever it was called Freddie Mercury and his band Queen, because Freddie was 25%, John 25%, Roger 25%, Brian 25%. Everybody had an equal input, equal output, equal input.
A lot of the time, they were never in the studio at the same time. I mean, you know, Fred would go do his bit, and Brian would go do his bit, and so on. And occasionally, of course, when they're doing the mixing and all that, so, you know, they'd all be there. And, yeah, sure.
And they disagreed about certain things, and they didn't, but it always came out all right. So their working relationship would be like any other working relationship. Like working in the theatre, you might have a disagreement with the director about how you're going to do something, but you have to get there because that's your unit. And I think they enjoyed actually working with each other and performing with each other. I think really, I don't think they do it. because they were strong enough that they would just say no.
At the height of the punk scene, Queen bounced back in classic style with a harder-edged rock album, News of the World, released on the 28th of October 1977. The album's lead single was the anthemic We Are the Champions.
That's probably one of their most diverse albums, thinking about it. Had We Are the Champions on and We Will Rock You, which are the two very famous songs on that album. But there were things like Spread Your Wings, which John Deacon wrote, and is an absolute epic. I'm not quite sure what the lyrics mean, I have to say, but that's another fantastic Brian May solo. Excellent. There's All Dead on there, which I can't remember if Brian sang or not. I think he did, actually. Which has got, in my opinion, the best guitar orchestration of his career. It's fantastic. That's with this little battery-powered amp that John Deacon made before Queen were even Queen, to be honest.
Fred wrote We Are the Champions on Cherry Brown's kitchen table. You know, I remember, because I was staying with Cherry at the time. And I just, you know, it's so important that song just sort of came out of. I'd given him a book on some Japanese poetry, and it was called You Are My Champion. And it all came from that.
We were playing a track which wasn't necessarily released as a proper A-side, which we all love and adore now, called We Will Rock You. I was a disc jockey in my own clubs in those days. So we were hammering We Will Rock You, you know. Because it was very short, which was perfect for the club scene in those days. We're not talking clubbers, we're talking nightclub dancing, real charty stuff. And I want to say again, he joined me for a bottle of champagne. He still didn't have that wild Freddie Mercury look, but he wasn't the curly-haired kid I'd seen in the early 70s either, you know?
As the 70s drew on, and Queen seemed to just become the biggest band on the planet, I think that the songwriting sort of became stronger in a way. The songs had to become more instant. The earlier albums with the more introverted music seemed to fall by the wayside, and the albums that came out like Jazz, you found that the songs were explicitly radio friendly and they more and more anthemic.
On the 8th of December came the release of the Flash Gordon album. Although the film was a relative disaster, the soundtrack gained rave reviews.
In the early 80s, after trying to work Flash Gordon, which I think is still a very successful album to listen to today, there's a lot of instrumental passages in it that worked quite well. But then they moved on to Hot Space, I think in '82, and it was as if they were trying to be disco, and really perhaps a little bit too late.
I cried when I heard it, believe it or not. Disco, oh my God, no. And it was no coincidence that their popularity started to come back down to earth, especially in America. But as Rogers famously quoted, they didn't really notice because they were so effing popular everywhere else in the world.
Freddie, now an A-list celebrity and with an income to match, had many interests outside of Queen.
I can't remember when I first met Freddie, because I feel I've known him all my life, really. When you meet him, he has that impact on you. But I think it must be because I was doing a musical at the Mermaid Theatre called The Point, and Harry Nilsson, the great singer, had composed this musical, and he was obviously from the pop world, and he was my introduction into that life. I think he introduced me to John Reid, Elton's manager, who then introduced me to Freddie at a gay club or something like that. And he said, "Oh, Mr. Sleep, I'd love to come and see the ballet." And I said, by all means. You know, I was really keen on, integrating the arts together. And so I thought, well, maybe he'll compose something for us at Covent Garden one day, you never know. And so then I introduced him to all the dancers. And he used Wayne Eagling to choreograph one of his videos. And I introduced him to Peter Freestone there, who became his minder, more or less, who was my dresser at the time. So we all got to know each other very well.
he didn't create an impression with me. He was small. He wasn't trying to be anybody. He wasn't trying to be, you know, he didn't actually have the full Freddie mask on. You know, he'd done his show, he was at a party afterwards. He still wasn't the Freddie I got to know. He still had the, you know, there was sort of like a wall, a mask, which also makes it hard to sort of gauge a person. If you were to meet someone like that, you think they're standoffish, they're arrogant. But Freddie never actually gave that impression.
The charisma of the man was startling, because within a short while of drinking a little champagne, as you would in those days, we were chatting away quite. And then it hit me, because I said, Freddie, I'd like a photograph. I said, okay. And he said, yes. But immediately started doing his hair and his face like this. Because all we got in those days was a Polaroid. So we got somebody to take a Polaroid of myself and Freddie. Now, I think the Polaroids were like maybe 10 to a pack. If I tell you we went through 3 packs before he agreed to let one go. And that's my first memory of him, because my same face, I've had a little smile, Freddie this way, that way, that way, that way, that way, that way. One after the other, and he insisted on keeping them all, and he chose one to let me have, and he took the rest.
My real respect for Freddie when I first met him came from the fact that he was interested in other people more than talking about himself. He came to see all the shows I did in the West End, came to see me in song and dance, came to see me in all the ballets at the Opera House, and then he started going to opera, and obviously he ended up singing for Montserrat Caballé, that Barcelona number. And also his, you know, concern for my career even. He would say, why don't you do a concert at Wembley Arena rather than have to do 8 shows a week in the West End? You could do 2 big concerts there, you know, and, you know, fill the house, and you wouldn't have to do so much. He said, put up big screens, and he almost choreographed it for me there and then. He was just so keen. And then he would sit some nights, I would go back after a show, he would take us all to dinner. He was our meal ticket. We didn't have that much money in the ballet, and he would pay for everything. So generous as well.
Freddie was extremely generous. It wasn't always up front. You know, it wasn't all show. I mean, you know, he's quite embarrassed about certain things in his life. He wasn't embarrassed about his money, but you know, he loved giving presents. Yeah, of course. That's why he loved giving parties. I mean, he loved being generous. I mean, you went out to dinner with him. You could go out to dinner with like 20 people, 30 people, whatever, and he'd pick up the bill, of course. You know, but he always just, you know, there was no question. You know.
One of the greatest pleasures in his life was looking at people's faces when he bought things for people. If he went shopping, he wanted a cologne, something. So he'd go to Harrods and he'd buy what he wanted, but while he was there, he'd buy 10 different ones, so that when he came home, he was able to give a perfume to the cleaning lady, something for Mary, something for me, something, you know. He would never buy just sort of one of anything. He wanted to give. His pleasure was in giving.
And his generosity went to the point where he actually hired an aeroplane for some of us to be transported from Heathrow to Ibiza for his 40th birthday, and put us all up in hotels around his hotel, and we paid absolutely nothing. It was champagne all the way there and all the way back, I may add. Staggered off the plane afterwards after being up 24 hours. And when he did something, he really put the boat out. He didn't do things by halves.
Freddie loved entertaining, particularly at Garden Lodge. There was the 2 extremes. He loved doing sort of dinner parties for 12 people with 5 courses, different wines for each course, you know, the whole big thing.
I'm not one of those people that like to go to sort of press receptions and all these. Because I like to sort of keep myself to myself more than anything, or go to places that most people don't frequent. To be honest, that's just me being me. But yes, I do have friends in the showbiz world.
he loved entertaining. Freddie at home was Freddie, the Freddie that we knew. But as soon as he started ringing around, getting people in, the entertainer face started. Because even though they were friends, it was still a slightly different Freddie to the Freddie who'd come downstairs in his sweatsuit, you know, and sit down, lie down on the settee watching television, you know, count down the news or whatever. He loved that entertaining bit, just as he loved being entertained. One of the people who particularly stands out in my mind in that was Peter Straker. I mean, he, from the very first time I met them together, was in a restaurant on the Fulham Road, the Meridiana. It was at lunchtime. And they complemented each other so well.
And we used to fool around and just go out, and sometimes drinking and go clubbing, night clubbing. Just, in a way, normal things you do. Lots of eating. lots of very good eating, and lots of fabulous restaurants and good food, which I think he liked and we all liked. Yeah.
Peter could make Freddie laugh constantly. He had this wonderful wit. He had this wonderful, I don't know, they had this wonderful repartee. They just go boom, 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 boom. And I mean, so many nights, I remember going into the night just listening. I mean, I could sit there entranced because they would always be something. We had, one night, there was this 2-hour conversation on the subject of Sarah Ferguson and her bows, her love of bows. Every dress she had a bow on it. 2 hours. We were just, oh no, this one was bigger and this one was, but it was brilliant. It was amazing.
I think what we really did have in common was a sense of humour. I used to make him laugh all the time, and he loved that as well. And we all had nicknames for each other. I think I was known as Bridget the Midget, and he was known as Melina Mercury. You know. And everybody had names, nobody was spared. And the fact that some people liked it, some people didn't, I think. But so that was just fun for me.
Once he'd met someone and they were going to be around for a while, Freddie gave them a name. Going back from the theatrical tradition of giving sort of girls' names to boys, boys' names to girls, there was, I don't know, me, Phoebe. Joe Finelli was Liza. Elton was Sharon. Rod Stewart was Phyllis. Basically what it was, the names were given near enough to fit the surname of and for someone famous. Everybody got a name. If he didn't like you, you didn't get a name. So then you knew that you weren't going to be part of the. You could never be part of that sort of inner circle sort of thing. It was something you could never really resent. It was sort of proof that Freddie liked you.
What I love most about Fred was he had the most appalling laugh, and he would always cover his teeth up. He was so conscious of his teeth, you know, because he always thought they were sort of, you know, Janet Street porters and not his. But unfortunately, in the end, they were a trademark. I mean, his teeth, you know. But when he laughed, of course, he always laughed like this, with hand over his mouth, most of the time. And I just always, you know, the laugh still remains with me. I must say, because it was very infectious. Oh, my God, we laughed a lot.
Freddie needed people with him, people to react to, people to just be there. So he made him feel secure. He also needed sort of a clown around him. He loved laughing, and various of his friends filled the capacity. He had a wonderful sense of humour, a dry sense of humour.
And so to be able to go from being absolutely camp and daft and just being silly just for a laugh, and then suddenly be able to just switch to a serious note and talk about art in depth. I think that was what we had in common, and especially my information that I could give him about the ballet world and opera. He enjoyed all that immensely, so we were able to just jump in and out of serious conversations and have a right old laugh, which you don't find often with people. They're either seriously minded or they're outrageous. I think that's what we had in common.
Next album, The Works, was released on February the 27th, 1984, which included two of the band's major hits, Radio Gaga and I Want to Break Free.
They came back with The Works, which was possibly their heaviest album since the days of Sheer Heart Attack, really. They came back with these enormous riffs, like Hammer to Fall. You still hear it on the radio today.
Following Freddie's solo album, Mr. Bad Guy, in the spring of 1985, they were invited to appear at the Live Aid charity extravaganza in July. Queen, and in particular Freddie Mercury, stole the show.
And they played Radio Gaga, and for the first time, he saw 75,000 people doing all those hand movements perfectly. And I remember him saying they're doing it better than we ever did in the video. And the thing is, then he realised the power of video. That all these people were doing what they had seen in the video. Nobody asked them to do it. It was just the natural reaction. And they'd been doing it for the shows, but he had never really seen it. He'd see a few people at the front do it. That's as far as the vision went, you know, with the lights on you. So I think, and again, for the band, that was an important, it showed them that people loved them. They were still something in people's minds.
I did go to the Live Aid concert, where I think he really stole the show, quite frankly. And I remember Elton had a little caravan just outside Wembley Stadium, and so I was John Reid's guest. And Freddie was there. George Michael I met for the first time because he was going to sing with Elton. And we all went in and out. We didn't see everything. We kept coming out, you know, and having another glass of champagne. And I introduced Freddie to Viscount Linley, and I said to Viscount Linley, "This is the Queen." And Freddie went, "Oh, stop it, Mr. Sleep." But so he was quite embarrassed by that, but which you'd find rather strange, really, because, you know, it was only for a laugh, but you know, that's how modest he really was. And then, of course, he went on and just brought the house down. I remember shivers going up my spine.
I've seldom been so nervous, in fact, probably never. But I think it was the greatest day of our lives, even though we played only a very small part in it. I think it's the thing I'll remember above all out of what we've done in our career. It's an amazing day.
On March the 17th, 1986, the new single, A Kind of Magic, reached number 3 in Britain and shot to number 1 in a total of 35 countries around the world. The album of the same name was released on June the 2nd and went straight to number 1 in Britain.
Kind of Magic, the song, is in the top 5 of the best songs I've ever done. It's poppy, it's got loads of really difficult guitar stuff in it. Those major scales going up are not easy, and he pulls them off live, obviously, he pulls them off every time, as the tour later on the year proved, you know. But of course, Kind of Magic was sort of a half a Queen album, half a soundtrack for the Highlander film. So whatever parameters the Highlander requirements put on the music, you could never, well, I could never fully accept it as a whole Queen album, even though it had all the hallmarks.
It was again an album of the times. In a way, the Queen are quite good at a good barometer of what's happening in music at the time. Although it's the very mainstream end of it, certainly they never dealt in funk or hip hop or anything like that. But in terms of musical technologies, what they do is quite a good reflection of what's happening on a more wide scale in the world of music. So Kind of Magic as an album and a song reflects that very well.
Promoting the album, Queen wound down their Magic World Tour at Wembley Stadium in July 1986.
I mean, the one show I saw of Queen in all the time I was there was the Wembley show in '86. And that was stunning. You know, you can feel, Freddie reacts to audience, the whole band will react to the audience. Okay, they make their entrance and the audience roars, which gives something for the band to feed on. And the more the audience gives, then the more the band will give. And this goes for each of the members. They feed on this power coming from the audience. And to actually, you know, even on stage, you can see it on every show, and you can feel some of it. But when you're actually sitting in the middle of the crowd, it's impossible to describe. You just sort of burst. You're bursting inside.
Queen completed that year's Magic Tour at Britain's Knebworth Castle in Hertfordshire, performing to over 120,000 people. Queen were at the pinnacle of their concert form. However, unwittingly, the event was to become an historic one. It was to be the group's last live performance.
Knebworth is such a dramatic arena, a huge, great bowl with stately home in the background, and it was the last night of their tour. You know, they'd set it up for their tour party, after end of tour party, with all sorts of fairground amusements backstage, and mud wrestling and bouncy castles and sort of body painted naked models. I mean, it was a big blowout party of celebrating what they said at the time was their best ever European tour, and so yeah, they arrived. Freddie arrived by helicopter. We went to Battersea heliports and went up in about 2 helicopters. I think just Freddie's and his lot. And I don't like flying, especially in helicopters.
Freddie never really enjoyed helicopter flights either. Roger did, Brian did, John did. But Freddie just sort of sits there, quiet. But then, as we were coming in over Knebworth, and you saw this vast mass of people, it's mind-numbing.
And all these people, I mean, thousands of people, and landed round the back, and that was it. And that was something else. That was quite a good feeling. There was a huge roar from the crowd as he stepped off the helicopter and walked towards backstage. And then when he came on, just an absolutely fantastic reaction. I mean, the same sort of reaction that he got at Live Aid and at Wembley. And you could see how he was responding to it. I mean, he was just having a ball. And you know, he was up there saying, you know, this is an enormous place, even by our standards, and you all look beautiful, and you know, this is the best European tour we've ever done, and what a great way to end it with this fantastic show at Knebworth. One of the songs I remember from that was It's a Kind of Magic, which was great, and then all these huge things lifted off into the sky, and that was great because it's one of the good it's such a feel-good song. It's a Kind of Magic, and it says so much. And that one I did remember very, very much. One of the things that's always amused me about Queen, you envisage Freddie as being the outrageous one. He turns up in white cloaks and his coronation crown, he comes on at the end. But actually, take a look back at that day and check out the shorts that Brian May was wearing. Little white shorts that Brian May was wearing were as outrageous as anything Freddie wore that day.
Nobody knew it was going to be the last show, but Freddie particularly always went by the maxim that you were only as good as your last show, because that's the one that people are at, that's what they're going to remember. They're going to remember if he plays wrong music on the piano. They're going to remember because that was the thing that they were at. He thought the same about records. You always have to give as good as you can, because you don't know when the next one is going to be.
Since the band's inception, all of the members had grown and developed their own unique styles, both in talent and in personality.
Brian was a little bit more shy, but very. He was apparently much more quiet and would listen a lot, and have his own ideas. He changed guitar playing, really. I mean, in my opinion, his guitar, it was like a vocalist. He played some fantastic stuff, and he worked out. He was very, very meticulous. He knew what he wanted. He knew the sound he wanted. He was very sure what he wanted. I've heard him discussing occasionally, do you prefer this sound, Freddie, or not? But he knew what it went, because he wrote a lot of the songs, and they wrote songs together, especially towards the end.
In the touring days, he would spend his life on the road, and I remember there was one time he came home drunk from a Van Halen party because he was good friends with them. But nobody else went. It was him, and it was a guitar party, that sort of thing. But as I say, now Brian's now more enjoying that. But Brian is still. Brian, I think, out of all of them, was the most serious about his work, his music.
And then John, the bass player. I mean, John is exactly that. A bass player is a solid member of a band, And John is solid, He was a very solid character. Charming guy, softly spoken, nothing fazed John, straightforward. And you need that, I think, you need that, somebody in the background, making sure that nothing comes from behind you, it's like a defence from behind. And he provided that. And John always was the one who said to me, I'm just the bass player. I'm just so lucky to be in this band, because he didn't feel that his contribution was that great. But in fact, when you look back, I mean, he did a fine job, a brilliant job.
He was the one who always wanted to be able to walk into Tesco, walk into the supermarket, just to go and do shopping and nobody notice him. But the thing is, he's the one that could also come out, because he was quiet, with the biggest surprises. Freddie could never really surprise anybody because you expected the unexpected from him. But then John came out with Another One Bites the Dust. Totally, not something that you would think from John. John, who did Spread Your Wings, You're My Best Friend, that sort of thing. And all of a sudden, Another One Bites the Dust you've got from him. So, he gave you the unexpected.
They're very different. It's just different. They're just different people. Roger was, certainly when we first met, he was apparently the more outgoing person, the more easy person to get to know, and has always stayed that way.
Over the years, Roger was always the party king. When it came to parties in the band, and he would be invited to all the parties, and he and Brian particularly had friends within the music business, and whenever there was parties going like that, then or Roger would go. He enjoyed himself. It was something he felt he'd earned, the right to go to parties and enjoy himself. And it's true, he had.
In 1987, Freddie began more solo work and released The Great Pretender from his third solo album. Shortly afterwards, and having been introduced to the music of a Spanish soprano singer by Peter Freestone, Freddie was to collaborate with Montserrat Caballé and produce the single Barcelona for the 1992 Olympic celebrations.
I had an LP of Montserrat, and he just wanted to know what I was listening to. Why do you listen to it? What are you listening to? And so he took it into the studio and played it full blast out of the studio monitors. And because Montserrat has this incredible ability to sing very high, very softly, And so he wanted to turn it up as loud as possible to hear her singing softly. And how does she do it? But he turned it up so much that you could hear the chairs of the orchestra moving, them turning the pages, you know, of their manuscript. You know, that was the volume he had it at.
And then we went, when they were doing, we went to Barcelona, with a huge concert in Barcelona. And we had to do some backup singing there. That was great fun, because in that square, it was an amazing place. And the King and Queen of Spain was there, and Montserrat were there, and they did the big Barcelona thing, which is now famous. And that was great. That was good fun. That was really good fun.
Montserrat was surprised. Montserrat Caballé was surprised when she worked with him, because she had only ever heard that voice of Freddie's. But when she heard, she made him sing in his normal voice for one of the tracks on the Barcelona album, and it's a natural baritone. But you think